This past week, I've been working on a new mixing method in which tonal and transient elements are separated and mixed independently. Now, I didn't think it would make a big difference, but honestly, it sounds so good that I think this might be how I'm mixing from here on out. So if you want to learn how to do this so that you could try it out for yourself, or if you're kind of bored doing the same thing for every mix, stick around as we look into a new experimental mixing method with some surprising results. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out our mixing and mastering membership. Just for signing up, you receive 10 free mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering education courses. But more on that at the end of the video. So let's start with transient and tonal separation. If we were to look at an ADSR of a signal, the attack and decay contain the transient, and the sustain and release contain more of the tonal aspects of an instrument. The transient typically has a percussive sound and has higher energy in the high frequencies. The tone plays a bigger part in our perception of the pitch or the note, and often contains a lot of the quieter details that add enjoyable complexity to a signal whenever they're amplified. With that in mind, I thought it would be fun to find a way to separate the transient and the tonal aspects while minimizing artifacts. Then they could be mixed separately as a way to control dynamics, the frequency response, and perception of depth and width a lot better than a traditional transient expander could. Now I'll show you how to do it in a second, but here's a before and after in which the separation was used for the kick, snare, bass guitar, and electric guitar. Okay, here's how to separate the attack and decay from the sustain and release. So after trying a few methods, I found that this is the best option. With iZotope's RX Audio Editor, I could first import the signal that I want to affect. I'm going to use the snare stem since it's the easiest to process. Now, quick note, if you don't have this platform, all you really need is this module pack. It's a lot less expensive than the full RX suite, so know that you have some options if you don't have access to this software. Now, if we observe the waveform, we'll notice how much high-frequency energy the transient has, whereas the tonal aspects quickly lose high frequencies, but retain the snare's fundamental note. So first, I'm going to isolate the transient. Using the D-Click module, the best results that I found for the snare come from using the low-latency algorithm, a frequency skew of +5, a higher sensitivity, and click widening as high as it will go, in this case, 5 milliseconds. Then, I'll enable output clicks only, so that I'm monitoring only the first 5 milliseconds of the snare's transient. With the preview function, I could monitor how well the module isolates the transient and determine whether or not I need to change any of the parameters. Once I'm happy with the result and feel that the transient is being isolated accurately and with minimal artifacts, I'll click render. Now again, output clicks only needs to remain enabled. You'll notice that now I have just the snare's transient in the waveform. At this point, I could export the snare's transient as a new WAV file and save it wherever relevant. Using the history window in the bottom right-hand side of the software, I'll bring up the initial state, which is our original unprocessed snare stem. You'll notice our D-Click module has the same settings as before. We'll keep everything the same, except this time, disable the output clicks only function. Now you might be tempted to tweak some of the settings at this point, but for reasons I'll explain later, you want these to stay the exact same as before, except with the transients attenuated instead of isolated. After we click render, you'll notice the change in the waveform. The transients aren't completely gone, but the majority of the signal is now only the tonal aspects. Again, we'll export the processed file. So once you've exported both the transient and the tonal versions, bring them into your session on 2 separate tracks. Now, let's talk about mixing with the transient and the tonal tracks. Before you start altering anything, be sure that the 2 tracks are in line with the original snare. Now, since we use the low latency mode, you don't need to worry too much about anything being out of time, so long as the original, the transient, and the tonal tracks are all lined up and start at the same time. Then, mute the original snare if you haven't already, and we can start mixing. Now here's what I love about this setup. If I want the snare to have a lot more punch, I could increase the transients level. If I wanted to have more tone, I could increase the tone track. At first, I was concerned about adding distinct processing to each since I thought it might introduce phase cancellation between the two. But what's awesome is that it doesn't. Now, typically, when you have a multi-tracked instrument, if you process one and not the other, the phase rotation caused by EQ changes, especially with high-pass and low-pass filters, will negatively impact the sound. But since we're using the exact same settings to create the transient and the tonal tracks, what got attenuated from the tonal track is exactly the transient track and vice versa. Now, this means that the signals occur at slightly different times, allowing us to add whatever processing that we want without worrying about phase interference. But before we add any processing, let's quickly take a listen to the two tracks being adjusted and notice how much control it gives us over the snare. At this point, let's introduce processing to the transient and tonal tracks. So now that we know that we could have distinct processing for both tracks without causing issues, let's process them however we see fit. I didn't do too much here, but I added this PSP Vintage Warmer to both tracks and brought quieter details forward through its drive and maximization functions. For the transient, I amplified high frequencies around 8 kHz while dipping a little of the unneeded lows around 100 Hz. Now for the tone, I amplified the low mids to emphasize some of the snare's ring and fundamental, but I left the highs alone. I also used a longer release time to cause more low-level detail amplification with this plugin's post-compression auto makeup gain. Then, I subtly equalized both tracks. This consisted of subtly boosting the fundamental note on both of them and cutting out more unneeded lows on the transient track. That said, you can literally do whatever you want. There's no reason that you gotta follow what I'm doing here. The important idea is that you can cleanly separate the transient and the tonal elements and then process them distinctly. So let's listen to the snare before and after this processing. Last up, let's expand some on this method. Now that we understand what goes into the method, we could try it on different instruments. The kick is another great instrument to try this on and has all of the same benefits as the snare. Bass is another good option. It still augments the sound overall, but it's more difficult to control artifacts. Now this is where experimenting with various declick parameters comes in. The same could be said about the electric guitar. It sounds better than before, but if you're not careful, you could add some noticeable artifacts during the separation process. Now, just like with the snare, we can create a balance between the transient and the tonal aspects of these instruments. For example, if I want the bass to be more aggressive and slightly brighter, I could emphasize the transient. Or say that I want the kick to be round and subtle. I could lower the transient. You kind of get the idea. Now I'm going to keep the processing simple and use the same PSP Vintage Warmer and some subtle EQ, but again, experiment as much or as little as you want. Let's listen one more time, this time to the full AB as I switch between each instrument's original stem and our processed transient and tone tracks. So what are your thoughts about this method? Is it something that you want to try? And also, can you think of any ways that it could be improved? Let me know. I always read all the comments, and I appreciate your insight in advance. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out our mixing and mastering membership. Just for signing up, you receive 10 free mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which includes start-to-finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by our thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers, and every day we see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers noticing a huge improvement in their mixes and masters after joining. Right now, you could join the membership with a 70% lifetime discount, bringing the cost down to just $15 per month. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.